the uneasy dream of equality. We live in a world obsessed with the word equality. From politics to classrooms to social media feeds, the idea is everywhere that we can somehow create a society where everyone stands on the same ground, where no one has an advantage, and where no barriers remain between people. It sounds noble, it sounds just. But here's the question that cuts deeper than slogans. Is true equality even possible, or are we chasing a dream that the human condition itself makes impossible? More than 2,000 years ago, Aristotle wrestled with this problem. Unlike modern activists or politicians, he wasn't trying to draft policies or stir up revolutions. He was asking something more fundamental. What kind of creatures are humans, really? And if we are the kinds of beings we are, can we ever expect life to be equal in the way people demand it to be? His answer was blunt, and often uncomfortable: no. Humans will never be truly equal, because nature itself has built hierarchy into the very fabric of our existence. That doesn't mean Aristotle was cynical or dismissive. In fact, his reasoning was layered, even compassionate in its own way. He didn't simply say some are better, some are worse. He mapped out a philosophy of why different people have different capacities, why society organizes itself into roles, and why treating everyone as identical is not only false but dangerous. To understand his reasoning is to see equality in a new light, not as a final destination we will one day reach, but as a complicated aspiration that will always meet resistance from the realities of human nature. 1. Aristotle's world, context of his philosophy. To understand Aristotle's claim about inequality, you have to picture the world he lived in. Athens, the intellectual heart of Greece, was a democracy by name but not in the modern sense. Only free male citizens could participate politically. Women, foreigners, and slaves were excluded. This was normal, not controversial in his time. When Aristotle looked around, what he saw was a city built on layers of hierarchy, each person playing their assigned role. Aristotle himself wasn't an armchair philosopher disconnected from reality. He studied biology, politics, ethics, and human behavior with relentless detail. He observed how plants and animals functioned in ecosystems, how some species dominated others, and how each creature seemed to have a natural place in the chain of being. For him, humans were not exempt from this natural order. Just as lions and lambs were not equal, neither were all humans. The structure of society reflected deeper truths about nature itself. So when Aristotle talked about equality, he wasn't debating whether everyone deserved kindness or respect. He was asking whether everyone had the same capacity for reason, virtue, and leadership. And his conclusion was that they did not. Some people, he argued, were born to rule, while others were born to follow. Some could master their own desires and live by rational thought, while others needed guidance and control. Equality, then, was not only unrealistic, it went against the grain of how humans and societies naturally functioned. 2. Natural hierarchies built into existence. For Aristotle, inequality wasn't an accident of history, it was part of the blueprint of life itself. He believed that nature never makes anything without a purpose. Every living being has a function, a telos, an end goal that defines what it is meant to be. For example, the purpose of an acorn is to grow into an oak tree. The purpose of the eye is to see. Likewise, the purpose of human beings is to live according to reason. But here's the catch: not every human is equally equipped to do that. From this observation, Aristotle drew the concept of natural hierarchy. Just as the body has parts that serve different functions, The brain thinks, the hands work, the stomach digests. Society, too, has people who are suited for different roles. Some are naturally inclined to lead and deliberate, while others are fit to labor or obey. To him, it was as absurd to imagine all humans as equal in role and capacity as it was to imagine the heart and the brain being interchangeable. Hierarchy wasn't oppression, it was order. This doesn't mean Aristotle believed some lives were worthless. Rather, he thought fulfillment came from living the role nature assigned you. The worker who labors well fulfills his purpose just as much as the ruler who governs wisely. But the equality modern thinkers imagine, where everyone can occupy the same positions or have the same authority, was, in Aristotle's eyes, a dangerous distortion of reality. It ignored the natural differences in capacity that he believed were woven into the human condition. 3. The political animal, why humans can't be the same. Aristotle famously called humans political animals. By this he meant we are creatures who naturally gather into communities, deliberate about justice, and create systems of governance. But crucially, not everyone contributes to this political life in the same way, just as not everyone can compose music or practice medicine. Not everyone has the capacity to guide or participate equally in politics. Some people, Aristotle observed, are better at reasoning about the common good. They can rise above personal desires, think in terms of justice, and make decisions that balance the needs of the whole. Others struggle to control their impulses or lack the education to think on such a scale. For Aristotle, this meant politics requires hierarchy, leaders and followers, decision-makers and citizens who obey the laws. If everyone tried to exercise the same power, chaos would follow. Here lies a central paradox in Aristotle's thought. Humans can't flourish without politics, yet politics itself exposes the fact that humans are unequal. The very existence of a political order, with rulers, laws and systems of justice, proves that not all people are interchangeable. If true equality were possible, politics would be unnecessary. But since it's not, politics exists precisely because inequality is inevitable. 4. Virtue and capacity. Not everyone can reach the same heights. For Aristotle, the highest good in life was eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing or living well. Achieving this meant living a life of virtue, guided by reason. But here's where the divide deepens. Aristotle didn't believe everyone was equally capable of virtue. Virtue, he argued, is a matter of habit and discipline. It takes training, practice, and a certain strength of character to consistently choose the good over the bad. Some people, he thought, were naturally better equipped for this kind of life. They had stronger reasoning powers, better self-control, or more favorable circumstances. Others were too ruled by appetite, pleasure, or fear to rise to the same level. They could live decently, perhaps, but not with the same excellence. This idea directly challenges modern views of equality. Today, we often say that everyone has equal potential if only given the right opportunities. Aristotle flatly rejected that. In his eyes, no amount of training or education could erase the fact that some people are simply better suited for higher forms of virtue than others. Inequality wasn't a social mistake to be corrected. It was baked into the fabric of human nature. 5. Slavery and household, the sharp edge of Aristotle's thought. Perhaps the most controversial part of Aristotle's philosophy of inequality is his defense of slavery. To modern ears, this sounds appalling. But for Aristotle, slavery wasn't just a social convention. He believed it had a natural basis. he argued that some people lacked the full capacity for reason, and therefore it was natural for them to be ruled by others. In his view, the household itself revealed these inequalities. Men, women, children, and slaves all had different roles. The man governed, the woman managed domestic affairs, the child grew under guidance, and the slave provided labor. Each role was, in his mind, necessary for the household, and by extension the city, to function. The idea of all these members being equal would have seemed nonsensical to him. It's easy and necessary to critique this position today. Aristotle's defense of slavery ignored the brutal realities of coercion, exploitation, and human dignity, but his reasoning again reveals a broader point. He saw inequality as not just a social accident, but as a fundamental principle of order. Even in the most intimate unit of society, the household, he believed hierarchy was inevitable. 6. Equality in politics, Aristotle's warnings against extremes. Aristotle didn't just talk about inequality in households or among individuals. He also applied it to political systems. He worried about the dangers of radical equality, the idea that everyone should have the exact same share of political power, regardless of ability. In his Politics, Aristotle criticized forms of democracy where all citizens had identical authority. He argued that such systems often collapsed into disorder, because not everyone had the wisdom or restraint to govern well. Instead, he favored a mixed constitution, where political power was distributed according to merit and responsibility. Equality in the sense of one person, one vote would have struck him as simplistic, even reckless. His reasoning touches on a timeless concern. If everyone is treated as politically equal, what happens when the majority lacks wisdom or virtue? For Aristotle, this was a recipe for mob rule, where decisions are driven by passion rather than reason. Equality, when pushed to the extreme, undermines the very stability that politics is meant to preserve. 7. Comparing Aristotle to modern equality. Today, we often take equality as a moral foundation. From the Enlightenment onward, thinkers like Locke, Rousseau, and Jefferson declared that all men are created equal. Modern democracies enshrine equal rights, equal protection under the law, and universal suffrage. At first glance, Aristotle seems worlds apart from these ideals. But here's the catch: even in modern societies, perfect equality doesn't exist. People still differ in wealth, education, opportunity, and influence. Meritocracies still favor the talented or privileged. Economic systems still produce vast inequalities. In a way, Aristotle's realism about inequality still rings true, even if his justification for it, natural hierarchy, feels outdated. So the comparison raises a sharp question: have we actually refuted Aristotle, or have we just changed the way we talk about inequality? Modern ideals push toward universal equality, but human reality keeps pushing back with differences in talent, effort, and circumstance. The tension Aristotle identified hasn't disappeared. 8. Philosophical challenges to Aristotle. Of course, Aristotle's view of inequality hasn't gone unchallenged. Many later philosophers argued that his reasoning confused social conditioning with natural reality. Just because someone is uneducated or oppressed doesn't mean they are naturally inferior. Given freedom and opportunity, many supposedly lesser people have shown the same capacities for reason and virtue as anyone else. Modern science also complicates Aristotle's claims. We know now that human differences are influenced by environment, culture, and chance, Just as much as by nature, intelligence and character aren't fixed categories assigned at birth, they develop in complex ways. Aristotle's strict divisions between ruler and ruled, master and slave, collapse under the weight of modern evidence. Yet even critics admit that Aristotle's larger point, that humans are not identical in ability, motivation, or temperament, is hard to deny. The challenge is to build societies that recognize difference without turning it into domination. Equality then becomes less about sameness and more about dignity and fairness. 9. The enduring relevance of inequality. Why, after more than 2 millennia, do Aristotle's ideas still matter? Because debates about equality are everywhere, and they echo his concerns. Should everyone earn the same wage, regardless of skill or effort? Should everyone be admitted to elite universities, or only those with the highest scores? Should political power be equally distributed or weighted toward those with expertise? Aristotle reminds us that equality is not a simple good. Striving for equality can clash with other values, excellence, merit, stability, or freedom. He forces us to ask whether treating everyone the same is always just, or whether justice sometimes requires acknowledging differences. In a world wrestling with inequality of wealth, education, and opportunity, Aristotle's realism cuts through idealism. He may have been wrong about slavery, gender, and many specifics, but his central claim that humans will never be truly equal still haunts us. 10. Equality is aspiration, not destination. If Aristotle was right, then equality will never be fully realized. But does that mean it's worthless? Not necessarily. Even if complete equality is impossible, the pursuit of it can drive progress. We may never eliminate differences in talent or fortune, but we can still fight against unfair domination and unnecessary suffering. Aristotle's own philosophy leaves room for this. He believed in cultivating virtue and building societies where people could flourish according to their capacities. While he didn't see all humans as equal, he did value justice, friendship, and the common good. These values push us to improve conditions for as many people as possible, even if perfection is out of reach. So perhaps the lesson is this: equality is not an endpoint we will one day reach and declare victory. It is a guiding star. A principle that shapes our efforts to build fairer systems while accepting that differences will remain. Aristotle shows us that the dream of perfect equality may be impossible, but the struggle toward greater fairness is essential. Conclusion: living with the paradox. In the end, Aristotle's argument is not comfortable, but it is powerful. Humans, he insists, will never be truly equal because inequality is natural, inevitable, and necessary for society to function. His justification, rooted in hierarchy and even slavery, is deeply flawed by today's standards. But the broader truth he identifies, that differences between people make perfect equality impossible, still confronts us. The paradox we face is this: we long for equality because it represents justice and dignity, but we live with inequality because humans are not identical in capacity, desire, or circumstance. Aristotle forces us to sit with this tension, to recognize that the dream of equality will always run into the hard edge of reality. And maybe that's the point. Equality is not about erasing every difference, but about refusing to let difference become domination. If Aristotle shows us why humans will never be truly equal, then our task is to prove that humans can still be truly just. That is the challenge his philosophy leaves in our hands.